Sister, you really bonded with a human. Can I try too? Ethan Vale crouched in the underbrush, tapping his gloved fingers lightly against his thigh. He had expected the alien sanctuary to be well guarded, but the presence of patrol drones weaving through the bioluminescent foliage was something his intel hadn't fully prepared him for. Though he stood nearly 6 feet tall and his athletic build was made more imposing by reinforced tactical gear, he felt strangely small in this vast alien environment. Past the flickering lights of the drones, the sanctuary rose like a colossal organic structure, its pale violet walls seeming to throb like a living creature. For days, Ethan had pieced together scraps of data, clues about his sister Mara's disappearance. She'd vanished on a reconnaissance mission near this alien territory, and he believed, no, he knew, she had come here. He brushed a hand through his chestnut-brown hair, its medium-length strands slick with sweat. Anxiety sharpened the angles of his face, his cheekbones catching the faint, eerie glow that suffused the air. His green eyes, flecked with bits of gold, darted left to right as he searched for any sign of movement. Beneath the tension, Ethan's heart pounded with a mix of worry, guilt, and determination. Mara had always insisted on forging her own path, and he'd supported her, even giving her key bits of intel he'd gleaned from analyzing alien signals. Now all that might have led her into danger, or worse. He exhaled softly, fighting the urge to tap out a comforting rhythm on his thigh. That habit had started back when he was a teenager, learning music composition and code-breaking techniques at the same time. Patterns, rhythms, sequences, those were always the key, whether for deciphering alien communications or for writing a simple melody. The riddle of this sanctuary was no different. If he could just get inside, find some records, or overhear something about human captives, he might learn what happened to Mara. He decided to wait until the drones floated out of sight, then sprint to the oddly shaped archway on the far side of the courtyard. The arch itself shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and from a distance it looked more like a living membrane than a solid gate. If he could hack into its control panel, it might lead him inside. He pressed a button on the device strapped to his left forearm, and the small screen lit up with lines of alien script. He was one of the best codebreakers in his sector, known for seeing patterns where others only saw chaos. He also had a reputation for diving too deep into danger, which was exactly what he was doing right now. With a deft step, Ethan moved across the soft undergrowth. The leaves, broad and gently pulsing, curled away from him, reacting as if they sensed his presence. He paused mid-stride, hearing a subtle hum in the air. Another drone, or something else entirely. An inexplicable wave of heat radiated down the corridor just ahead. Then the space shimmered, and a tall figure emerged from an alcove of living vines. She was lithe and elegant, her silhouette outlined by the softly glowing flora. In the gloom, Ethan could see her deep violet skin, streaked with faint, luminescent lines that snaked across her arms and neck. She wore sleek armor made of some organic material shaped to fit her form, and her silvery hair, cut short and asymmetrically, caught the ambient light like metallic threads. Her eyes, large, pupilless, shifting from amber to indigo, locked on him the moment he entered her line of sight. Ethan froze, arms halfway raised in a non-threatening gesture, but she was impossibly fast. In a blur of motion, she leapt, her elongated fingers hooking around his wrist as she twisted him off balance. He fell to one knee, forced down by a strength that belied her narrow frame. Her scent, a spiced tang with undercurrents of something floral, suffused the air. Her lips parted slightly, and Ethan realized with a shock that her breathing and emotional state were intimately connected to that aroma. Alarm, or perhaps curiosity, spiked in her scent. "Who dares trespass here?" she asked, her voice low and resonant with an accent that seemed to roll the consonants around her tongue. Ethan groaned. He couldn't wrench his wrist away without risking a broken arm. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. This was an alien guardian, likely one of the sanctuary's elite defenders. If he fought back, he might end up dead. If he surrendered, he might never find his sister. He forced himself to meet her gaze, searching for any hint of reason or mercy. "My name is Vale. I'm not here to cause harm," he said, trying to steady his voice. "I'm looking for someone, a human who might have come here." Her eyes flashed indigo in the center, the color rippling outward. She said nothing, but her hold tightened. In the silence, he noticed the faint whirring of the patrolling drones in the distance. They'd be on them soon. Gritting his teeth, he whispered urgently, "Look, if you don't want them coming over here, we should move. We're both in danger." A flicker of doubt passed over her face. Perhaps she sensed he was telling the truth, or maybe the notion of drones interfering made her wary. She released him abruptly, and he stumbled back, rubbing his aching wrist. Even while stepping away, she kept her posture perfectly poised for defense. He recognized the stance of a trained fighter, someone used to infiltration and close-quarters combat. In contrast, he was no slouch, but he was more accustomed to hacking security systems than physically subduing guards. She gestured curtly for him to follow. With her elongated fingers, she tapped a sequence on a small control, embedded in the organic wall. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow corridor, lit by pulsing veins of teal bioluminescence. She entered first, and though he hesitated, he realized this might be his only chance to avoid a direct confrontation with the drones and possibly get the answers he needed. He followed her inside, and the panel resealed behind them, cocooning them in a cramped, softly lit space. For a few moments, they simply stood there, the glow of the walls casting shifting patterns on their faces. Her stare bored into him, unreadable but intent. She had a regal, otherworldly beauty, deep violet skin that was smooth and unblemished except for the faint luminescent lines. He noticed she had translucent claws at the tips of her fingers, carefully retracted so as not to scratch him, but capable of swift violence if she chose. "You said you're looking for a human," she began. "What is your purpose here?" "Humans are not permitted in the sanctuary unless there is a dire negotiation." "There was no negotiation, or at least not that I was part of," Ethan answered. "My sister, Mara Vale, disappeared. She was on a mission near these territories. I've tracked her trail to this place." He paused, swallowing hard. "I think she might have betrayed our people or been coerced by your technology. I'm not sure. All I know is she's here. I need to find her." She considered his words, shifting her weight. Her eyes flickered between amber and indigo in a mesmerizing display. "I am Lyssari'ahn. My people entrusted me with guarding this sanctuary. I do not know every human who has come, but I have encountered one with your resemblance. She nearly infiltrated our deeper vaults." A jolt of hope and dread coursed through Ethan. "So you've seen her?" "She escaped. My superiors insisted no trace of her would remain, but it seems not everything was handled as I was told." There was bitterness in her voice and a faint spike in her scent, something slightly acrid, possibly guilt or regret. Ethan's mind whirled. If Mara was indeed here, then she'd managed to elude even these elite guardians. What was she after? Then another pressing question. "Why did you bring me here instead of turning me in?" For the first time, Lyss's posture relaxed just a fraction. She looked away, arms crossing over her chest as if protecting herself. "You carry a similar desperation to the one I encountered months ago. There is—" Her nostrils flared, inhaling a hint of something. "You reek of worry and guilt, but not malice. And these drones, they do not discriminate. They would stun you, perhaps kill you." "I would rather hear your explanation first." Ethan nodded, unsure of how to respond. He felt relief and something more complicated, a flicker of empathy. She was giving him a chance, but that chance came to an abrupt end when the corridor trembled. Somewhere deeper in the sanctuary, a pressurized seal broke, sending a tremor through the living structure. Dim lights began flashing in rhythmic patterns, and a low alarm droned like a pulsing heartbeat. Lyss's head jerked up. "Something's gone wrong," she said. "A security breach. Possibly your sister's doing. We need to get out of this passage." She led him deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. Each tunnel seemed alive, the walls exhaling faint, bioluminescent glows at the pace of a living pulse. Whenever they paused at an intersection, Ethan noticed Lyss's skin lines would brighten, then dim, as if in communication with the sanctuary itself. She had an uncanny grace, stepping lightly, her silver hair shifting like liquid metal with every subtle motion of her head. After climbing a series of spiral ramps, they emerged into a larger chamber that, to Ethan's surprise, looked like a garden. But the garden was housed under a curved dome of organic material, the plants radiating rainbow-like luminescence. A vent near the center of the room was hissing, releasing thick, pale gas that started to fill the area. Lyss's eyes widened. "Subterranean gas flare. If it reaches critical levels, it will ignite." She pointed toward a control panel nestled against one of the giant glowing pods. "We have to seal that vent." Ethan rushed toward the panel, the tapping of his boots echoing in the chamber. The shapes on the display were like alien glyphs, swirling in overlapping circles that threatened to blind him if he looked too long. But code-breaking was his specialty. He set his jaw, took a steady breath, and began analyzing the patterns. This was no simple lock, but some form of emergency control. He tried to slow his racing heart, aware that fear would hamper his ability to see the logic. Carefully, he tapped a few controls, adjusting the glyphs in what he hoped was a coherent sequence. Behind him, Lyss had unholstered a small, organic pistol that looked like it grew from her armor. She was scanning the perimeter, her posture tense. He could sense the nerves simmering under her graceful poise. The swirling gas thickened, creeping toward them in milky tendrils. Every second counted. With a click and a hiss, Ethan found a crucial override, and the vent's iris-like opening began to close. He heard Lyss exhale in relief, but the success was short-lived. The gas, though contained, had already begun reacting with the environment. Sparks of light flickered around the chamber. In a swift movement, Lyss grabbed his arm, pulling him away from an erupting spout of flame that shot up from the ground. The chamber's alarms escalated to a high-pitched wail. "We can't stay here!" Lyss shouted over the noise. "The next flare might be worse." They bolted through an exit on the far side, just as another explosion rocked the garden chamber. The heat scorched the back of Ethan's neck, but he barely cared. He was alive, and Lyss was dragging him to safety. They found themselves in a side corridor, panting against the walls. She turned to him, eyes glowing indigo with adrenaline. You saved the sanctuary from a full meltdown, at least for now." Her voice had a strange softness. Even as her chest heaved, her violet skin glistened with sweat, and the luminescent streaks brightened with each rapid breath. "Why are you really here, Ethan Vale?" He swallowed, feeling the dryness in his mouth. "To save my sister. But I also want to make sure she doesn't destroy anything, harm anyone." He ran a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "She's my only family, but if she's turned dangerous, I can't let her keep going." Lyss studied him, her gaze traveling across his face. He wondered if her sense of smell told her more about his sincerity than he could convey with words. "Your sister nearly unraveled our defenses the last time she was here. If she is working with the others, raiders from your own people, it could lead to devastation." He felt a pang of guilt. "I know, but I can't just give up on her." Lyss's eyes darkened, swirling with flickers of amber. "I failed once to keep her from infiltrating deeper. That mistake weighs on me like a stinging shame in every breath. I will not fail again." She looked away, her short silvery hair reflecting the corridor's glow. A swirl of spiced bitterness entered the air, a scent that made Ethan's heart tighten, though he didn't fully understand the intricacies of her species' emotional sense. She bore guilt, too. She felt responsible for letting Mara slip away. In that moment, they both recognized something in the other, burdens of regret, layered with the longing to set things right. He opened his mouth to respond, but a wave of dizziness hit him from the lingering fumes. Lyss placed a cool hand on his forehead, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You're reacting to the gas." She flicked open a compartment in her armor, retrieving a slender vial filled with a faintly glowing liquid. "Inhale this. It will neutralize some of the toxins." He leaned forward, letting her hold it beneath his nose. The aroma was pungent, but within seconds, the fog receded from his mind. He exhaled, a little steadier. "Thanks," he managed. "I guess you're stuck with me if you want to stop Mara, right?" She tilted her head, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. "You still believe you have a chance to reach her, despite everything you've seen?" He nodded. "She's always been strong-willed, but we share a bond, music. When we were young, we composed songs together. She used to say the only constant in life was change, and we had to shape it, or be shaped by it." A reflective flash crossed Lyss's face. The spiced bitterness of her scent faded, replaced by something subtler. She extended her hand in a formal gesture. "Then we work together, at least for now." He grasped her hand gently. Her skin was smooth and warm, the luminescent lines faintly pulsing beneath his palm. "You won't regret it." They pressed onward through the corridors. The alarms gradually subsided, but the tension remained. Something deeper in the sanctuary was going very wrong. Sporadic tremors suggested sabotage or infiltration, possibly orchestrated by Mara or allied raiders. Their path wound around massive, root-like structures that spiraled up from the floor to the ceiling, each one pulsing with alien energy. Ethan found himself marveling at the intricate beauty. This place felt like a living organism, each part connected to a greater network. When they encountered an automated defense node, a tall, spindly mechanism armed with energy lances, Lyss sprang into action. She melted into the shadows, her violet skin seeming to blend with the environment as her bioluminescent lines dimmed. With a swift slash of her translucent claws, she disabled the machine's sensor array. Then, Ethan slipped in to connect his hacking device to the node's panel, neutralizing its weapon systems. The synergy was effortless, like they'd practiced for years rather than a few harried minutes. In one of the safer corners, they paused to catch their breath. The corridor had widened into a small antechamber, and from there they could observe the next area. A faint violet glow lit the place, and the walls were covered in alien script that pulsed in reaction to their presence. "How are you doing that, blending in like that?" Ethan asked quietly, mindful of possible patrols. Lyss looked down at her arms, noticing the faint shimmer. "My people have specialized pigment cells that shift to reflect or absorb the ambient light. I can't become completely invisible, but it helps in certain environments." He nodded, fascinated. "I've never seen anything like it." She hesitated. "I was trained in infiltration and close-quarters combat to protect the sanctuary. Your sister was the first human to breach past me." "She can be relentless," Ethan murmured. "It's in our blood." They exchanged a look, and for a moment it felt as if the swirling tension between them wavered, replaced by a deeper connection. Each recognized the other's strengths and vulnerabilities. Then a warning beep on Ethan's wrist device jolted them both. Movement ahead. Raiders, or perhaps more drones. They crept forward, treading carefully. The corridor opened onto a suspended walkway overlooking a vast chamber. Below, several figures stood around a pulsating core of alien technology. Ethan recognized one of them instantly. Mara. Even from this distance, her tall, lean figure and dark hair were unmistakable. She wore a form-fitting tactical suit with foreign modifications, its surface etched with alien runes that glowed faintly. Another figure, masked and bulky, appeared to be instructing her on manipulating the console. Ethan's heart clenched. Mara's presence confirmed his suspicions, but the question of why she was doing this hovered like a storm cloud. Had she truly abandoned humanity for power, or did she believe she was saving them? Below, she tapped on a control panel and the machinery responded with a resonant hum. "This is a crucial site," Lyss whispered. "It houses technology that could rewrite certain biological drives, instincts, emotions. It was deemed too dangerous, locked away centuries ago by my ancestors. If your sister and these raiders unlock it..." The possible implications churned in Ethan's gut. This technology could manipulate minds on a fundamental level. He thought of how Mara had once told him that extremes were sometimes necessary for survival. Could she believe she was protecting humanity by taking control of this monstrous device? "We need to disable it," he said fiercely. "Now!" As they surveyed the chamber for a way down, the walkway lurched. A hidden sensor in the ceiling must have registered their presence. With a hiss, a segment of the walkway retracted, forcing them to leap onto a precarious ledge. Lyss grabbed Ethan's hand, helping him balance. She guided him around a cluster of living vines that spiraled up from below. The vines twitched, reacting to their movements, gently brushing against Lyss's ankles, as if recognizing an ally. Mara's voice rang out from below, crisp and commanding. "Spread out. Secure the perimeter. I want no surprises." Her tone was clipped, powerful. She had always been the more confident sibling, forging her own path without fear. Hearing her speak that way again made Ethan ache with longing and fear. She felt so close, yet at the same time, a stranger. They found a small access hatch behind a wall of vines. Lyss brushed her palm across them, prompting the vines to part. Together, they slipped into a dimly lit maintenance tunnel that led downward. At one point, they had to jump from a small platform to a lower ledge. Ethan misjudged his footing, and his heart shot into his throat as he slipped. Lyss caught his arm just in time, their combined momentum nearly pulling them both down. But she braced herself against the wall, the strength in her lithe frame surprising him all over again. When he finally got his feet steady, they locked eyes. Their labored breathing mingled, and the slightest smile touched her lips. "You humans are heavier than you appear," she teased, even as her scent spiked with a hint of relief. He gave a faint chuckle, though his chest felt tight from adrenaline. "Thanks for the catch. I guess we're stuck together after all." She nodded, and her luminescent patterns pulsed more brightly for a heartbeat. Indeed. Eventually they emerged onto a mezzanine overlooking the core. Rows of slender, transparent columns jutted from the floor, each filled with swirling, iridescent liquid. Mara stood at a control station near the center, her attention fixated on the readouts. Several raiders hovered nearby, armed with advanced rifles and scanning the perimeter. One raider noticed movement above, but before he could raise an alarm, Lyss flicked her arm forward. A small organic blade shot out, striking him in the neck. He collapsed silently. "We have to move fast," Ethan whispered, sizing up the console. He recognized patterns akin to those in the earlier control panels, but this was far more complex. "If I can get close, maybe I can shut it down for good." Lyss nodded. "I'll cover you. Just be prepared. Your sister might not let us do this without a fight." Steeling himself, Ethan scaled down a beam, landing behind a row of columns. He ducked low, feeling his heartbeat hammer in his ears. Lyss followed, moving with silent grace. The plan was to flank Mara's position, take out the guards, and give him enough time to sabotage the device. But even the best plan might fail if Mara was ready. They inched closer, the pulsing lights reflecting on their faces. One guard patrolled dangerously near. Lyss melted into the shadows again, sneaking up behind him. Ethan saw her luminescent markings dim as she struck, knocking him out in a single blow. Another guard turned, confused by the noise, but Ethan sprang up, punching him square in the jaw. He might not be a specialized fighter like Lyss, but in these close quarters, surprise was on his side. The guard crumpled. They continued this careful dance, disabling guard after guard, until only Mara remained near the console. She must have sensed the commotion, because she whirled around, leveling a sleek, alien-modified firearm at them. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating her sharp cheekbones. A jagged scar marred her chin, an old mark that Ethan remembered from a training accident years ago. Her brown eyes, once filled with warmth, now glinted with a cold resolve. "Ethan!" she spat, incredulity clear in her tone. "What in the world are you doing here?" He stepped forward, holding his hands out to show he was unarmed. "I'm here to find you, Mara, to bring you back," she scoffed, glancing at Lyss. "And you've allied yourself with one of them. How poetic." A sneer twisted her lips. "We humans have been at the mercy of these aliens' hidden powers for too long. Don't you see the potential of what's in this place? We could finally tip the scales in our favor." Ethan shook his head, voice trembling. "This is dangerous. It's a device that can manipulate instincts, even wipe out entire emotional spectrums. You don't know what you're meddling with." Mara's eyes flashed. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Humanity is on the brink of collapse. This sanctuary holds the key to protecting us from future invasions, from the unpredictability of alien species who think we're too weak to defend ourselves." Lyss, who had been circling to the side, spoke in a low voice. "Your kind negotiated peace with us, but you sabotage it by trying to seize forbidden technology. You'll destroy yourselves." Mara sneered. "I've seen enough. Enough broken treaties, enough infiltration attempts. How long until your species decides to turn on us, enslave us with your mind-altering devices? I'm simply beating you to it." Ethan took a step closer. "Mara, we can't just—" She fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the columns, nearly hitting him. He dropped to the floor. Lyss lunged, but Mara swiveled, aiming the gun at her. "Stay back." A tense stalemate settled in the chamber. Ethan could feel the vibrations of the active device beneath his feet. The swirling liquid in the columns glowed in agitation. Desperate, he locked eyes with his sister. "I never wanted to hold you back. I know you went on these missions to protect our people, but this isn't the way. You're risking billions of lives. Even if you succeed, you'll destroy who we are, transform us into something monstrous." Mara's jaw clenched. "There's no future for us unless we evolve. The device can rewire the aggression in our enemies, or amplify it in ourselves. Don't you see? This is how we survive." Ethan shook his head, sorrow twisting his features. "That's not survival. That's genocide or forced indoctrination. Remember when we wrote music, Mara? You always said creativity was what made humanity special. Now you want to strip away or force something onto others, just like any tyrant would." Her hand trembled on the firearm. For a flicker of a moment, Ethan saw doubt in her eyes, but in the next breath, that hardness returned, and she pressed a control on the console. The columns whirred ominously, the swirling colors intensifying. An alarm wailed from somewhere deeper in the sanctuary, as if the structure itself was reacting in fear. Lyss took advantage of Mara's momentary distraction. She dashed forward, using a sophisticated martial sweep to knock the gun from Mara's hand. It clattered across the floor. Mara hissed in frustration, throwing a punch that Lyss blocked with her forearm. The two women locked in a brief, vicious struggle, each trying to gain the upper hand. Finally, Mara shoved Lyss back with surprising strength. Ethan scrambled for the gun, but it skidded beyond his reach. Instead, he sprinted to the console. If he could disrupt the machine's sequence, maybe it would shut down before it could cause irreversible damage. The glyphs swam before his eyes, but he forced himself to calm. Rhythms, patterns. He tapped his fingers in a subtle sequence, searching for the hidden logic. Yes, there, a series of glyphs that matched the code he'd seen in the earlier override. Carefully, he started inputting the commands. Mara caught sight of him at the console and aimed a savage kick at Lyss's midsection, using that opening to lunge toward Ethan. At the last second, Lyss twisted, grabbed Mara's wrist, and yanked her away. They collided with a set of cylinders, toppling them. One shattered, releasing a surge of that iridescent liquid, which hissed and evaporated in the air. The entire chamber rumbled. A jolt of energy coursed through the floor, knocking Ethan to his knees. He clenched his teeth, focusing on the hacking. He could feel the device was close to a critical threshold. If it overloaded, the explosion or meltdown might take the entire sanctuary, and them with it. Lyss and Mara wrestled behind him, grunts and gasps echoing in the vaulted space. At last, Ethan found the shutdown sequence. He pressed the final glyph, and the swirling fluid in the columns stuttered, the wailing alarm dulled to a ragged chime. With a final roar, the device powered down, sending pulses of energy outward that crackled like lightning. One stray bolt lanced through the chamber, forcing Ethan to duck. When the sparks faded, the column's glow died to a faint shimmer. Mara, pinned beneath Lyss, let out an anguished cry. She slammed her fist against the ground. "You fool! You've doomed us all! Don't you see we need this power?" Ethan rose slowly, unsteady from the surge of adrenaline. "At what cost?" he whispered, staring at his sister. "How many lives would have been lost or twisted into something unrecognizable?" She locked eyes with him, chest heaving. For a moment her anger flared, then wavered into something like despair. "You'd choose them over me, Ethan?" He shook his head, tears burning behind his eyes. "I choose to stop you from destroying everything we stand for. I'm sorry, Mara." Lyss, breathing hard, glanced at Ethan for direction. They exchanged a silent understanding. Ethan bit his lip, unsure if he could just hand his sister over to alien authorities. But he also knew she was a danger. His family ties clashed violently with his moral compass. Before he could speak, Mara yanked a concealed blade from her belt and slashed at Lyss's forearm. Lyss recoiled, blood welling up along her violet skin. Mara used the moment to wrench free, scramble backward, and sprint toward a side corridor. Ethan cursed. He started to give chase, but Lyss caught his wrist with her uninjured arm. Her scent flared with the sharp tang of pain. "Let her go," she said, wincing as she applied pressure to the wound. "The device is deactivated. She can't use it now. Our priority is keeping the rest of the sanctuary secure. There may be other raiders to handle." Ethan swallowed, torn. "She's my sister, I can't just—" But he saw Lyss's injury and the swirl of exhaustion in her alien eyes. Mara was gone, and he had to pick his battles. "Let's seal this place," he relented, forcing back a surge of grief. No one should have access to this technology again. They spent the next several minutes ensuring the console's override remained locked. Ethan layered multiple encryption sequences using both alien glyph logic and his own hacking knowledge to create a synergy no one else could easily replicate. Lyss guided him through the sanctuary's built-in security measures, her emotional sense shifting from pain to resolve, with occasional warm notes of relief whenever their eyes met. Exhausted and battered, they finally retreated to a hidden side chamber that served as a small medical bay. The walls glowed with an ambient pinkish light. Organic cabinets lined the perimeter, filled with vials, bandages, and salves that emanated a gentle warmth. Lyss set about treating her wound, peeling back a piece of armor. Ethan hovered near her, concern etched into his face. "Let me help," he said gently, removing his gloves. She hesitated, then nodded. He disinfected her arm with one of the alien salves, applying a bandage that bonded to her skin like a second layer. The close proximity made him acutely aware of her breath, her gaze, and the subtle shift of her bioluminescent markings as they brightened each time his fingertips touched her. She inhaled sharply. "Your sister is dangerous," she said. "I'm sorry, but you know it is true." He nodded, eyes downcast. "She's changed. She's driven by fear and the belief that we need this. I don't know if I can reach her, but I had to try." Gently he smoothed the bandage over her skin. Lyss exhaled a quiet, shaky breath. Her usual poised composure faltered, revealing a moment of raw vulnerability. "I blame myself for letting her escape before. This sanctuary was my duty. I should have realized the threat sooner." Ethan forced a sad smile. "We both carry guilt, then." For a time, they were silent, lost in their separate regrets. Outside, the distant hum of alarms had quieted, leaving only the faint pulse of the sanctuary's living walls. Eventually, Lyss said, "You have risked much for this place. For me. Why?" He looked up, meeting her intense gaze. "Because I see in you someone who also cares, not just about your people, but about right and wrong. And because we're both caught in the crossfire, we might not share the same world, but we share the same conscience." Her eyes flickered from amber to a softer shade of indigo, the color swirling as she processed his words. "This is all so strange. My training never prepared me for this sort of connection with a human." Ethan gave a short, breathy laugh. "Believe me, I never thought I'd be this close to an alien guardian in some hidden sanctuary either." Their eyes locked, and the tension in the small room shifted. A soft flush crept over her violet cheeks, echoed by a subtle sweetening of her scent. He realized he was staring at her, noticing the curve of her lips, the elegance of her jawline, and the mesmerizing luminescent lines that snaked across her neck, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed to mirror her heart. His own pulse quickened, and the old familiar guilt tugged at him. He'd lost his sister to obsession, and now here he was, drawn to someone from the very species Mara despised. But the undeniable pull between them crackled in the air, heightened by the adrenaline of near-death experiences. He saw the shift in her posture, the subtle parting of her lips, the search in her eyes for permission or reassurance. Slowly, he raised his hand, brushing aside a stray thread of her metallic hair. His fingertips tingled at the contact. Lyss's breath caught. Her scent bloomed, warm and inviting, with hints of spice that felt like an open secret. She turned her face into his hand, nuzzling gently. In that moment the tension snapped, replaced by a mutual understanding that they both needed this closeness, to feel alive, to acknowledge something pure amid the chaos. He leaned forward, and their lips brushed, tentative yet electric. The first kiss was soft, charged with everything left unspoken. Her mouth parted, and his heart thundered. They pressed closer. Her armor shifted as she slid her arms around his waist, and his gloved hands found the curve of her shoulders. She was warm and strong, her bioluminescent markings glowing brighter in response to each shared breath. Their kisses grew deeper, more urgent, fueled by relief and the recognition that life could end so abruptly in a place like this. She pulled away for a moment, eyes swirling with color, and he felt her nails graze the back of his neck, sending chills down his spine. Carefully, she guided him toward a small resting bench along the wall. They sank onto it, breathing heavily. Her slender fingers traced the contour of his jaw, her eyes roving over his features as if memorizing them. He felt a rush of desire that mixed with a surge of genuine affection. He wasn't sure when or how it had happened, but the bond forming between them felt vital, something that transcended mere circumstance. She moved closer, and he tilted his head, meeting her in another deep kiss. A low hum of pleasure left her throat, and the sweet scent in the air thickened. They lingered in that hungry closeness, hands exploring each other's forms with cautious curiosity, hers skimming along his chest as if marveling at the texture of human muscles, his savoring the soft strength of her violet skin. His mouth ventured to the base of her neck, discovering a sensitive spot that made her moan softly. Their bodies pressed tight, hearts pounding in unison. Just when the moment seemed poised to tip into something even more intense, Lyss shivered with a combination of longing and caution. She brought her lips back to his ear and whispered, "We should be careful. The raiders. There could be more. This is not the safest place." Ethan nodded, still breathless. "I know," he said softly, nuzzling her cheek. "But I needed to be sure of this. Of us." She closed her eyes, exhaling warmth against his neck. "I did too." They let the moment fade to black, sliding into a tender embrace that held the promise of more without fully surrendering to it. The stress of the day, the near disasters, the rush of fear and hope coalesced into an intimacy that was both fragile and fierce. After a time, they separated slightly, eyes bright with the knowledge that things had changed between them. In the next hours, they continued their search through the sanctuary's corridors. The temporary stillness after Mara's retreat gave them time to reassess the structural damage and lock down vital areas. Ethan used his hacking expertise to block unauthorized access to other vaults, while Lyss scouted the perimeter for any sign of remaining raiders. Their synergy deepened, each trusting the other's skill and judgment. As they worked, they exchanged small, meaningful touches or glances. It was as if the kiss had opened the door to a deeper understanding. She began to explain more about her people's traditions, how their scents betrayed their emotions, how certain bonding rituals involved mutual scent synchronization. He told her about how his code-breaking skill emerged from a love of music, the patterns in notes merging seamlessly with the patterns in cryptography. She asked about Earth, about the concept of family dinners and old folk songs. He found himself talking about Mara in a more nostalgic light, remembering her sense of humor, her unwavering loyalty, traits that now felt twisted by fanaticism. In one of the sanctuary's deeper tunnels, they encountered a cluster of organic defense turrets that had been tampered with. Sparks flew from the turrets' roots, and they whipped around, spraying bursts of plasma at anything that moved. Working together, they overcame each turret. Lyss used her stealth to approach from a blind spot, slashing control cables, while Ethan deactivated them remotely. Though they succeeded, it became clear that Mara had prepared for a broader assault, leaving sabotage in her wake. Their last major obstacle came in the form of a data chamber near the heart of the sanctuary. The chamber was a swirling tapestry of organic fiber optics, each thread pulsing with living data. This was likely where Mara had gleaned the knowledge to manipulate the device. The place thrummed with residual energy, nearly humming in the back of Ethan's skull as soon as he stepped inside. He carefully interfaced with the alien control node, feeling the living data surge under his fingertips. Lyss's presence calmed him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder while she watched for any sign of trouble. And trouble did come. An automated sentinel, shaped like a coiling serpent of metal and biotic material, slithered down from the ceiling and lunged at them. In a heartbeat, Lyss sprang into action, her claws extended with a sharp, crystalline sheen. She parried the sentinel's metallic jaws, sparks flying where they collided. She moved with lightning speed, each strike precise. Ethan crouched by the console, trying to bypass the sentinel's control system. But it was adaptive, reacting to every line of code he entered. Growling in frustration, he realized he needed Lyss's help. "Draw it closer to the console," he shouted. With fluid agility, Lyss feigned a retreat, leading the serpent-like sentinel into range. Ethan yanked out a coil of fiber optic cables from the console and jammed them into the sentinel's side. The alien system blinked as if confused by the direct link. Quickly, Ethan typed a surge of commands, forcing the sentinel into a loop. It convulsed, let out a metallic screech, and collapsed. Lyss jumped back, panting, her silver hair clinging to her forehead. When the sentinel lay still, Ethan slumped with relief. "Good work," he breathed, looking up at her. She offered a hand, pulling him to his feet. Their eyes lingered on each other, sharing the rush of victory. Then turning back to the console, he finalized a purge of the data archives, deleting the knowledge that Mara had stolen. Lyss watched with satisfaction, her scent tinged with gratitude, and maybe a hint of that sweet warmth that signaled deeper affection. They returned to the medical bay to rest and patch each other up again. This time, they allowed themselves a bit more comfort. Lyss retrieved a specialized tincture that dulled the aches and pains, applying it to Ethan's bruises with gentle fingers. He hissed as the ointment stung, but the pain quickly subsided, replaced by a soothing numbness. She was thorough in her care, which only heightened the awareness between them. They made camp in a small side room, locking the door behind them. Thick, living walls insulated them from the labyrinthine corridors, offering a semblance of safety. Lyss retrieved nutrient packs from a compartment, and they shared a quiet meal. The taste was alien, sweet and slightly tangy, but Ethan found he could stomach it. As they ate, they exchanged hushed words, rehashing the day's events and the swirling emotions that accompanied them. Eventually, the conversation gave way to a charged silence. Lyss shifted closer, her thigh brushing his. Her scent, which had lingered at a mildly spiced note, began to sweeten again. Ethan turned to her, drawn in by the faint glow along her cheeks and the flicker of her eyes. With a tentative smile, he reached out, resting his palm against her jawline. She nuzzled into his touch, releasing a quiet hum of pleasure. He felt the same magnetic pull he had earlier, only now there was more certainty behind it, less fear, more acceptance. Their lips found each other again, a slower, deeper kiss, as if they had all the time in the world. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his, inhaling his scent. He felt the rapid thrum of his pulse. "Ethan," she murmured, his name rolling off her tongue in that soft alien accent. "I don't know what happens next. My duty is here, but I can't ignore what's happening between us." He swallowed, brushing a thumb across her lower lip. "We'll figure it out," he said, voice husky with emotion. "I'm not going to run from this, Lyss." She searched his eyes. Then, with careful deliberation, she began removing portions of her organic armor. He matched her unspoken invitation, sliding off his gear and setting it aside. Every piece removed was like shedding a layer of guardedness, leaving them more exposed, both physically and emotionally. Soon they were lying on the low pallet, half-clothed, hearts pounding in unison. Her kisses grew bolder, and he responded with equal passion, hands roaming across her warm skin. The small jolts of pleasure that sparked wherever they touched were nearly overwhelming. The sweet, spiced scent around them intensified. He felt her press closer, arching her body against him, her breath hot against his ear. She murmured a phrase in her language. He didn't understand the words, but their meaning was clear in the reverent way her lips moved over his throat, his collarbone. His fingertips explored the luminescent lines that adorned her body, fascinated by the way they pulsed brighter at his touch. Each caress seemed to excite a new ripple of bioluminescence, and she rewarded him with soft gasps and moans, the vibrations of her voice tingling across his skin. The alien biology entwined with the human response, forging a bond that felt both sensual and transcendent. Their bodies shifted, pressing together. She gasped his name again, her lips trailing along his neck. He guided her gently onto her back, supporting his weight on his elbows, studying her with awe. She opened herself to him, eyes lidded, luminous lines flickering in a mesmerizing pattern. Slowly, they came together. Lost in the heady mixture of desire and trust, the sanctuary's living walls seemed to hum in time with their heartbeats, time blurred into a tapestry of shared breaths, whispered words, and the primal rhythm of two beings finding solace in each other's arms. When the moment reached its peak, she arched beneath him with a trembling cry, and he pressed his face into the crook of her neck, surrendering to the wave of ecstasy that washed over them. In that heated union, the lines between human and alien blurred, replaced by the raw truth of connection. They let the intensity fade to black, lying entwined under the faint pink glow. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. She turned her head toward him, her violet face aglow with an expression he'd never seen, unguarded tenderness. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the lingering sweetness of her scent. He didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment, he found profound peace. The rage and desperation that had driven him here softened. He still wanted to save his sister if possible, but he recognized that all paths forward would be different now. His old fear of attachment, born of losing Mara, melted under the warmth of Lyss's acceptance, and she, having confessed her guilt and fear of failure, seemed to find new strength in his embrace. Eventually, they drifted into a light doze, lulled by each other's warmth. When they awoke, the sanctuary was quieter, though the memory of sabotage lingered in the corridors. They dressed quietly, sharing a few soft smiles and stolen kisses. The tenderness was a promise, a vow that though danger still lurked, they faced it together. Their next focus became securing the entire sanctuary. Lyss used her position to access the control center, verifying that no other vaults had been tampered with. Ethan helped by sifting through reams of encrypted data, looking for any sign of hidden infiltration or booby traps left behind by the raiders. Their synergy was all the more potent now that they'd accepted their bond. Their trust and understanding of each other's nuances allowed them to work in fluid harmony, but the sanctuary's technology revealed an unsettling twist. A portion of data was downloaded by Mara before the final shutdown. She had enough knowledge to craft her own smaller-scale version of the device, or at least a weaponized form of it. Though they'd prevented the immediate crisis, the threat still loomed. As Ethan studied the downloaded logs, he felt dread gnaw at him. "She's out there, plotting her next move," he muttered. "I don't know if we can stop her without harming her." Lyss laid a hand on his back, her voice gentle. "You must accept that she may have to be stopped by any means, for the safety of countless lives." He shut his eyes, fighting tears. "I can't just let her destroy everything. She's my sister, but she's also become something else now." Lyss leaned in, pressing her cheek to his. "I will stand with you, no matter the choice you make. But remember, sometimes the hardest choice is letting go." Her words cut deep. He realized that to truly protect both their peoples, he might have to sacrifice any lingering illusions about saving Mara. A wave of grief hit him, but beneath it was a stark clarity. The vow he'd made to himself, to ensure no one else would suffer for his mistakes, had to take precedence. Together, they made the decision to seal the sanctuary from outsiders. Using ancient protocols, Lyss initiated a permanent lockdown sequence. The living structure began rearranging itself, sealing passageways and wrapping the deeper vaults in an impenetrable cocoon. This final act ensured no one would ever tamper with the device or the data again. Just as they completed the lockdown, a powerful tremor shook the sanctuary. Alarms blared anew. Rushing to a monitoring station, they saw that Mara had sabotaged the sanctuary's external supports. One last failsafe. The entire place risked collapsing unless they stabilized it from within. Ethan and Lyss dashed through corridors that twisted under the stress. Walls groaned as organic fibers snapped. Pools of luminescence formed from ruptured biocircuitry. They reached the central support column, a towering spire that anchored the sanctuary in place. Panels flickered with warnings. In that same moment, Mara emerged from behind a broken arch, face streaked with grime and fury. A chunk of debris had pinned one of her ankles, and she was trying to pry it loose. Ethan hesitated. He could leave her, let her face the consequences of her sabotage. But he was Ethan, her brother. With a grimace, he moved to help, gesturing for Lyss to keep guard. Mara glared at him, spitting curses. "You're a traitor to your species," she hissed. "Falling into bed with an alien. You're pathetic." He ignored the venom in her voice, bracing his shoulder under the slab of debris and pushing with all his might. Pain lanced through his muscles, but he managed to shift it enough that Mara could yank her leg free. She gasped in relief and stumbled to her feet, leaning heavily against a cracked wall. Their eyes met, and for a moment the harsh lines of hatred softened in Mara's face. "Why?" she croaked. "After everything, why save me?" He inhaled, holding back tears. "Because no matter how far you've gone, you're still my sister." She grimaced, almost as if she were battling an internal war. But the moment passed, and her features hardened again. "You'll regret this. If I can't have the sanctuary's secrets, I'll find a way to replicate the device. Humans won't be under alien mercy any longer." Lyss stepped forward, eyes flaring with righteous fury. "Your obsession endangers countless lives. You would sacrifice your own brother in this pursuit?" Mara sneered. He chooses to side with an alien. He's already lost to me. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, she limped away into a side tunnel, refusing Ethan's half-hearted call for her to wait. She vanished behind crumbling walls, the retreating echoes of her footsteps lost in the cacophony of the sanctuary's convulsions. Torn between chasing her and stabilizing the sanctuary, Ethan glanced at Lyss. She shook her head, placing a hand on his arm. "Let her go," she said, echoing her earlier sentiment. "We must save the sanctuary. If we survive, we can deal with her threat later." He swallowed hard, nodding. Together, they raced up to the main console, overseeing the support column. The displays flickered with catastrophic warnings, but Ethan, leveraging his mastery of patterns, began rerouting power and sealing cracks. Lyss input final commands in her people's language, coaxing the living structure to knit itself back together. Beams of radiant energy lanced through the cracks in the walls, merging with the organic architecture. With one final surge, the support columns stabilized. The tremors subsided, though the entire place groaned in protest. A hush fell as the sanctuary systems recalibrated, new walls sealing behind them. The meltdown was averted. Breathing raggedly, Ethan slumped, feeling relief and heartbreak in equal measure. Lyss placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "You did everything you could," she said softly. He nodded, tears stinging his eyes. "She's gone." "You gave her a chance," Lyss whispered. "The rest is on her." They made their way to the upper levels. Even battered, the sanctuary was still majestic, glowing with renewed life, as the living structure re-established its equilibrium. A council of Lyss's people arrived, alerted by the widespread alarms. Some looked at Ethan with wary glances, uncertain about his presence. But Lyss stood firm, explaining his role in saving the sanctuary, in shutting down the destructive device. Though several of them seemed uncomfortable, they recognized the necessity of forging peace, especially after seeing how humans could be both a threat and an ally. At Lyss's urging, the sanctuary's leadership decided to reaffirm the fragile peace treaty with humanity, with stricter controls to prevent further infiltration attempts. Ethan found himself signing a new set of accords, symbolizing cooperation and mutual respect. He was unsure if it would hold, especially with Mara still at large, but at least it was a step toward preventing future cataclysms. In the days that followed, Ethan and Lyss worked side by side, helping repair damaged sections of the sanctuary. Their relationship deepened in that time. Whenever they were alone, they tended each other's wounds, shared stories, and stoked the quiet embers of a growing love. One evening, after a long day of reconstruction, they found themselves on a high balcony overlooking the alien forest. The sky above was a swirl of purples and blues, dotted with unfamiliar constellations. The sweet, spiced hush of Lyss's scent hovered around them. She rested her head on his shoulder. He ran a hand through her silvery hair, marveling at how natural this closeness felt. "I never expected to find any sort of solace here," he murmured, staring at the alien stars. "But you changed that." She turned her face up, her luminous eyes reflecting the cosmic lights. "You saved me, too. You showed me that devotion to duty can coexist with opening one's heart." He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. What now? He knew the sanctuary was her home, her responsibility, and he was human, with a life back on Earth. She exhaled, her breath warm against his neck. "I want to be with you. If that means standing at the border of our worlds, building something new, so be it. The sanctuary will always be here, but maybe it doesn't need me every moment. There are others who can guard it now that the threat is diminished." Ethan felt a wave of tenderness. "I'd like that. I can't promise an easy life. We might face distrust on both sides." She brushed her fingers over his jaw, then down to his chest, resting her palm over his heart. "I only promise that we will face it together." Their lips met, a gentle affirmation of their shared commitment. In that tender moment, Ethan realized that this new bond, fragile as it might be, was worth fighting for. And though the specter of Mara still loomed in his thoughts, he resolved not to let it rob him of the present joy. A few days later, the final touches on the sanctuary's seal were complete. Much of the advanced technology was locked away, safely out of reach. The Alien Council approved Lyss's request to travel beyond the sanctuary for a time, to aid in bridging tensions with human territories. It was an unprecedented step, but they recognized that times were changing. In a quiet corner near the newly fortified entrance, Ethan and Lyss readied themselves for departure. She wore a lighter version of her organic armor, and he had a compact set of gear suitable for interspecies zones. Their eyes sparkled with anticipation for what lay ahead. That was when another alien figure slipped through the corridor. A female with a similar violet hue, slightly taller than Lyss, and with swirling luminescent markings across her face. She paused, sniffing the air with curiosity. A playful grin curved her lips. "Sister, you really bonded with a human." Her gaze flicked to Ethan, noting the closeness he and Lyss shared. Then she gave a teasing smirk, her own scent laced with mischief. "Can I try too?" Ethan blinked in surprise, cheeks flushing, while Lyss rolled her eyes in exasperated affection. She replied in a low growl, "This one is mine, Scifi." Scifi laughed, a melodic sound that rang through the corridor. "I only tease. You smell of happiness together. Good luck out there." With that, she darted away, leaving a trail of laughter in her wake. Ethan felt his heart lighten. The strangeness of this new life was also filled with moments of warmth and humor. He turned to Lyss, seeing the faint smile on her lips. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, eyes shining. Yes. Hand in hand, they stepped out of the sanctuary. Beyond, the forest glowed under the alien sky, leading toward the boundaries of human territories. Their path was uncertain, but their resolve was steady. The bond they had forged, through danger, desire, shared victories, and mutual vulnerability, had shaped them both. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. They walked into the twilight, leaving behind a sealed sanctuary and the echoes of a conflict that had once threatened to tear them apart. In its place, they carried a story of love found in the unlikeliest of places, proof that understanding could blossom even between worlds that had long stood at odds. And as they moved forward, every step resonated with the promise of a future they would define together, free from regrets and looking only toward the bright horizon. No regrets, no lingering illusions. The conflict had been resolved. Mara was gone, but the sanctuary was safe. The budding romance between Ethan and Lyss was sealed with their choice to remain together, forging a shared destiny. This was the end of their story, complete in itself, yet full of hope for the life they would build. They disappeared into the softly glowing forest, hearts brimming with love, and left no unfinished business behind.